Live.
Welcome, everyone. This is the Ends Justify the Memes, the show where the lowest of the low, that is the most wretched of wretched and deplorable to end all deplorable. Two white heterosexual Christian males from the American South, and today an Englishman, talk about culture, philosophy, history, health, and what it means to be a man in the 21st century. I'll be your host, Bill, and up here in the corner is my co-host and producer Tank, and the other side is Mr. KizzaGT. And with all that, crack open a beer and lend us your ear, because the ends always justify the memes. And once ago, when I go a little impromptu on the intro, it gets a little shaky.
That's good.
Yeah. So today, I think the main thing we were going to talk about was environmentalism, right?
Well, that's the title of the stream.
Yeah. So I remember last week when we were talking, Kiz had brought up something about environmentalism, and I thought it would be a cool topic kind of to get into on this stream.
Yes. Well, we talked about most of the things, but I think we kind of thought, you know what, that's a good idea for the next show. Talk about the hypocrisy of environmentalism.
Right. So I guess to open up, since you're the guest, you have any thoughts on that particular topic?
I mean, I'm just sick to death of the sheer hypocrisy over the subject. Why are we going, oh, we must save the planet. Well, China, India, they're like, nah, mate, we'll just have a giant bonfire in terms of emissions and make our cities look like make it so dirty that it's like smoking a pack of Marlboros a day. Good job.
Well, you do have to kind of wonder, this whole Paris Accord thing, when we pulled out and everyone acted like it was the end of the world, because I've been to China and I can tell you it's pretty dirty. So and that comes from someone who likes the country.
Well, like in the gutter oil and stuff like that. But a lot of that's due to their poverty too, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, when Trump did make the announcement at the time, I was just like, yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, hell, like China and India don't have to make any changes till 2030, while we're happily screwing ourselves over, economically speaking, to meet targets, which, last I checked, no country's actually meeting. And what's even funnier is, in recent years, Germany have decided to start tearing down a particular village and this type of woodland to get access to dirty coal, all because they turned off their nuclear power stations after Fukushima. Good job, Germany.
Well, a lot of this too, with the shutdowns and the lockdowns, are using as an excuse to, of course, say it's environmentally friendly to bring in the Great Reset and the UN's Agenda 2030 and all that, because all this is supposed to be motivated by essentially environmentalists that care more about the environment than, I guess, humanity. Because the way I see it, they want to make more things in the commons. And when you put things in the commons, you get that economic principle, the tragedy of the commons. And you're going to exploit and destroy more resources and more lands because there's no real ownership or careship of things. So the left has weird ideas about environmentalism. Soviet Russia was not environmentally friendly. I don't think that Cuba is either, nor Venezuela. But a lot of this too, in my opinion, just based on things I've read, is something going back to, depopulation of the earth. There has to be a certain amount of people in the earth. It can't be above, 550 million or something like that? We're reducing the population to less than 1%,
Well, right now we're about 7.5 billion. And I remember there was a great, I think it was a TED talk from like 96, where a guy talks about the realities of, I'm not sure if you've seen it, population and gumballs. I'm not sure if you ever seen that video.
Oh yeah.
He just points out the sheer hypocrisy of this idea of bringing in 1 million Americans, let's push for 2 million, and he keeps on doing it and point out that 80 million people are literally being born into poverty.
Well, not only that, but when we talk about immigration, people have all kinds of arguments against it. Mine is largely economic, in that when you bring in people illegally, specifically, or refugees and all that, often there aren't enough jobs for these folks. They end up living in greater or worse poverty than they came from. They don't have any tied culture, so it creates all these issues. And then, of course, because of that, crime rises and a number of other things. Plus, it devalues labor of the natural born citizens, the people that already live there. So there's a lot of issues with that. But again, if you get into like the UN's agendas, Great Reset and all that, that's part of what their thinking is let's bring the people from the Southern Hemisphere, that would be like South America, that would be Africa, of course, in the Middle East. They're like, let's bring people like from South, let's bring them up to the North to where everything's already built up and great. And then to my mind, I think the reality of that is so then we can depopulate those areas and exploit all the resources that they have, because they got a lot of resources, especially Africa and the Middle East. I'd say there's probably a lot in South America too, but we don't tend to focus on natural gas or coal or oil in those nations. There's some nations, of course, like Venezuela, which have great petrol resources, but it seems to me in South America, it's always about either farmland or the wood,
Yeah. I mean, right now, what makes me laugh is, especially with the United States, foreign policy is they love going into the Middle East for quote unquote oil, but I'm surprised they haven't gone into Venezuela yet, considering supposedly, depending on who you asked, they have bigger oil reserves than Saudi Arabia does. And Saudi Arabia has a ton of oil, to put it in perspective. But then also you got Chile, which, to my knowledge, last I checked, unless this has been recently changed, they have the world's largest lithium reserves in the world. Which is and that's a very critical material right now with all the push for with batteries, because all the big companies like Tesla and various other, Samsung, etc., they're all chasing after lithium material for their batteries, for their cars and phones and so on and so forth. So it's just kind of hilarious that we mostly in the north side, like UK, yeah, we have a bit of oil. United States, sure, they have a bit of oil and some resources. But it seems to me like Africa, like Middle East, China, South America, all rich to the brim of resources, and we're the ones with next to no resources.
Well, I think that a lot of the idea, at least in previous administrations in the United States, was to conserve or reserve our resources, our natural lands, and to exploit those in other nations before we go to ours. The idea of peak oil or energy or any of that stuff, that fossil fuels won't be around. And for me, like carbon taxes and that kind of stuff is just an idea out there to essentially have a transfer of wealth where, the common man can't have as much energy or as much luxury as this wealthy person. And of course, all that money that gets taxed just goes to the wealthy, just goes to the corporations, or goes to those in politics.
It persistently does. I mean, one thing I will say when it comes to the topic of oil, one thing that really does drive me heading, especially with the automotive industry, this is definitely possible in the United States purely because you've got the land to do so, but somewhere in Britain, we definitely cannot, because we're a tiny island, is that you could effectively, if you wanted to, go all in on agriculture and just convert almost all your cars to bioethanol fuels.
Can you do that with, so bioethanol, the way I understand it, it's basically you get it from corn, correct?
Yeah, mostly corn, yeah. Okay. Or you can get it from recycled food. For instance.
But Brazil, was it Brazil? I forget what it was. I'm pretty sure it was Brazil. Nations in South America have already tried that. It's not as feasible as people would like to believe.
Well, I mean, it's not quite. I mean, right now it is a bit issue because ultimately you don't have the infrastructure. But I do know places like Brazil, they have full-on like pure ethanol fuels, and to convert a conventional petrol diesel car to a bioethanol setup doesn't take a lot. It just takes a few modifications. Not massively expensive, but it's definitely possible. So you effectively free up the automotive industry and also the consumer of the car to what kind of fuels they're running. Because I do know in Sweden, Christian von Koenigsegg, the founder of the Koenigsegg supercar company, he's invented a new tech called free valve, which basically allows it to run on almost any type of fuel, ethanol fuel you could think of, from basically pure crude oil to basically 100% alcohol and anything in between.
I've seen a lot of things about, various biofuels, biodiesel, whatever in the past. The interesting thing is I'm not, as much as I'm conspiratorial on many things, I'm not really conspiratorial in believing that the oil companies are trying to keep folks from creating these kind of technologies. Obviously, Elon Musk has done very well with Tesla and his vehicles. My thing is, I always go back to is the reality is no matter what fuel source we have, no matter what way we create or use energy, there is always some sort of environmental cost. Even using solar panels creates a environmental cost due to the mining and materials and toxins in the process. And then what a lot of people don't know, and I'm no expert on this, mind you, but what a lot of people don't know or understand is that solar cells are extremely inefficient and lose a lot of energy, and it's very difficult to store that energy. For me, I look to people like Bjorn Longborg because he seems to have a very good head about these things. He's not an environmentalist that's going nuts and going, "Oh no, we have to destroy everything and get rid of all the fossil fuels." And people don't think these things through. Even if we reduced it here in, let's say, the Western world, in the industrialized world, we're driving the world economy. So much like the COVID pandemic has spurred on people wanting to do lockdowns and destroy all this, economic landscape that's been built up over decades and a century or whatever here in the States. What folks don't really understand in the long term is that's money and resources and products that are going to go away in third world nations because they rely heavily on our economy being stable and our dollar. And on top of that, I covered this the other day over on All Minus One. Like we're up to 35% now of all money ever being printed, fiat money in the last year. It's 23% like 2 weeks ago. I looked at it. Now it's 35 freaking percent. We're going to have massive hyperinflation in the United States in about 2 years, and it's not going to be good.
Oh hell no! That's just got Weimar Republic written all over it.
But that's going to be because we're the world currency and tied to the petrodollar, right? What happens with that? Well, that is going to destroy the third world outright, and it's going to be bad. Now, the globalists might have planned this, opening up China, getting off the foreign exchange reserve gold standard, whatever it's called, getting off basically the Bretton Woods agreement. And they might have planned all this, in my mind anymore, I'm starting to believe this, to switch us over to some new global currency. And of course, a lot of people want crypto or some sort of tech currency. I'm not really a fan. I like commodities, but...
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is this big push for one world currency, which Keynes himself desperately wanted, and he called it a bank hoard, as he put it. Basically, a currency that could be used everywhere. Now, technically, in a sense, we do technically have that with something like Bitcoin. Now, to me, I know we went over this many, many weeks ago. One advantage of Bitcoin is the fact it's not controlled by a central bank. It's effectively a decentralized system of currency. So therefore, you don't have, let's say, the Bank of America or the Bank of England or Bank of China or whichever, which directly controls the currency. Because it's completely decentralized, effectively, no so-called globalist can directly control it, which is great for the working man. But at the same time, because it's a crypto, it can get very, obviously, much like stock markets, it can get, it could drastically spike very angrily up or down, depending on its value. Like when I first came about it, it was worth like $10. Now, if I want to buy it, last I checked, it's like $12,000.
Right.
You're kind of hitting on the point there about the whole worldwide currency thing. Is that pre-industrial society, when even under the British Empire, they were trading currencies all over the world. Like pretty much every culture they came in contact with accepted gold and silver or something similar. So it's not like you're saying. It's not really the fact that it's global and universally recognized. It's that it's controlled by a centralized bank. That seems to be the biggest issue. If we went back to the gold standard, like old Bill here's talking about, it wouldn't necessarily hurt our ability to trade with other countries, I don't think.
Well, to me, it was engineered. Okay, like according to the Constitution, we have to be on a gold standard. Gold and silver are the only means of currency that we can use. Now, you can print notes that you can exchange for that.
Yeah.
Once the Federal Reserve Bank was implemented and the income tax was implemented, it basically the Great Depression happened. What the Federal Reserve Bank did is they manipulated the interest rates of things, which is what they still do. And without the market explaining the interest rates, without the market being naturally setting what the interest rates should be, business people don't understand when they should invest or when they should save. And so this and other things, manipulation of the market, artificial manipulation, caused run on the bank and all those things that led up to the Great Depression. Now, we had some of this in 1920 and 1921. The difference was Calvin Coolidge was laissez-faire and said, let the market handle it, and within a year, everything recovered.
Also, sorry to interrupt, but
no,
also back then, the government at the time made no financial stimulus.
Right. So then finally, Hoover started implementing all these programs. And then when FDR came in, he did all these things. And when he essentially made gold illegal and then said that we were only going to have a foreign exchange standard, which was 1/3 of the value that gold was before, he essentially stole 2/3 of everyone's gold or wealth overnight and put us on a fiat currency. The thing is that fiat currency was relatively stable because of the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II. And then when Nixon came along and got rid of that completely, what probably happened was the Federal Reserve Bank, which is private, was hoarding or taking a lot of that gold within interest because many of the investors, many of the owners within the Federal Reserve are not United States citizens. The Rothschilds are, of course, from England, and they are some of the big investors or owners of that bank. And much of our U.S. national debt is just interest on that debt. So to me, all this was engineered like a long plan, long-term kind of thing. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the way the chips have fallen. But the money question ties into this environmental thing, in my opinion, because if we had a stable, strong economy, not on a fiat currency, we could be more environmentally friendly just because we'd be wealthier. And the poorer you get, the less people care about that stuff. Until recently, most people in the world, just to heat their homes or to cook, use dung, So they use animal dung or their own human feces, which of course is gross. And that's the stuff I'm talking about in China. We're seeing with people using like sewage oil. What's that called? Whatever it is. They basically pull oil up out of nowhere. This is fresh in my mind because I was watching Tim Pool last night and they were talking about this. But like they're doing stuff like this, or they have like the wet markets, or they have this or that because of the poor standards in manufacturing, because communism doesn't care about the environment. It only cares about its control and control the population. And the kind of standards that we've actually implemented, I would suggest for environmentalism, all go back to our wealth, goes back to what little capitalism or free markets we actually have in the United States still, and so forth. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of stuff that goes on in the third world, it's like almost a carbon copy of what happened in the UK during the Industrial Revolution. Because Because what people seem to ignore is back then during the first industrial revolution, Jesus Christ, the amount of polluting the UK was doing that thing was utterly atrocious. Like, for instance, the River Thames in London was literally just pure sewage. Was pure sewage, if you can imagine that. And the water, even just the genuine water, was so dirty. You were actually safer drinking alcohol than you was drinking, let's say, tap water. It was that dirty, and that's why there's tales of everyone in the UK, based in London at the time, being completely drunk, because it was safer to drink alcohol back then. Alcohol which is not as refined, or you have the standards of quality control like you have today, than it was drinking water. So it's just a straight up carbon copy. And the problem is, when you think of a place like China and India, because of how many people there are, are we now going to say in the West, as selfish bastards, selfish in the people, say, no, you can't have what we have because it's going to cause too much damage? Or are we going to say, okay, you can have what you want, forget about the planet, and come 50 years' time, when we basically destroyed anything, we're going to create a quote-unquote Mad Max society? I know that sounds ridiculous, but you think, when we polluted our waters, destroyed all the woodlands and all that stuff, what are we going to have left?
And I think you're kind of getting into one of the reasons why I want to talk about environmentalism is that I think we all agree, obviously, that mainstream environmentalism is absolutely retarded. It doesn't make any sense. But I think a lot of people in kind of this sphere don't really take into account alternative forms of environmentalism. Like, I consider myself an environmentalist. I kind of look at this concept they call deep ecology, and it kind of goes into what you're getting into. So I kind of wanted to just take a minute to explain to anyone that might be listening what I'm talking about here. So there's mainstream environmentalism. It's your Greenpeace, it's your Paris Accord, it's your yada yada yada. The thing that separates this from deep ecology is basically mainstream environmentalism believes that you can consume and consume and consume at any rate whatsoever, and eventually the experts are going to figure out that we can power our entire planet off of algae farts or whatever. And in fact, every single time we progress as a society, it actually costs. It has a material energy cost. Anytime you want to come up with a new gender and you want to put it in all your legal documents, that translates to using fossil fuels. So the deep ecologists or the dissident ecologist, whatever you want to call it, they see it that the real way to be environmentalist, so to speak, is to consume less. That's really one of the things. I think a lot of people on the right, they kind of get into this concept, but really, we just don't realize how much our society is driven by just blind, mindless consumerism. And the leftists blame that on capitalism, but anyone who wants to make that argument, I point to 1960s Cultural Revolution China, where kids were just constantly buying up Mao propaganda and sticking it all over their body. So consumerism exists everywhere. It's a matter of modernity and industrial society, not necessarily an economic system. But I wanted to bring up a guy specifically that I read. Let's see if I can share this.
You can.
Application window. Okay. This gentleman, he's a young guy. His name is Chad. I think it's Haig is how he pronounces it. And he writes a lot of books on.
Yeah, Haig. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a really cool YouTube channel. Actually, let me get that away. Don't change from France. I live in France, guys.
That's fine.
but he writes the books on Ted Kaczynski and some other things. But he has this philosophy. Basically, it's called the philosophy of peak oil. And a lot of people kind of don't buy into peak oil and understand that. But I think he makes a good point in that whether or not you ever think that the world is going to run out of oil, it costs a lot more to get oil out of the ground now than it has in the past. And it doesn't seem to be changing. So eventually we might have to wrestle with the fact that oil might be too expensive to use on the scale that we're using.
Or we have to modernize the way that
or something. Yeah. Well,
yeah. But some of the stuff, man, goes back to like Malthusian type mindsets where Thomas Malthus thought that we wouldn't be able to innovate for the population growth that we were going to have, and therefore we're going to have to limit population growth. And we just don't know what science, technology, or just the human will create over time to make things more efficient. But before you go on with that, Tank, I wanted to thank Purge Time over on D Live for subscribing. We got another guy in here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rob Yes, who says he's Turkish. He's asking me about Erdogan, which I'm not super familiar with. And then, of course, over on YouTube, we have Matt joining us again, who was with us last week. So appreciate you, Matt, for joining. And guys, if you want to, there is an entropy where you can donate or whatever. Of course, there's always
ask questions in there.
Yeah, you can ask questions in there as well. You can donate lemons, all that good stuff. Biggest thing for us, just like, share, subscribe, that kind of thing, because we are kind of new at this. We're growing. But yeah, we enjoy doing it, and we like to have these kind of deep, long conversations. So appreciate everyone for watching.
Yeah, I was just going to go with what Tank was saying. It is true. We do make a material perspective, but what I do find funny is something that I do see there is a turn regarding those in the scientific community and some stages of environmentalism. They're starting to turn away from, let's say, the old thinking, from going from, let's say, wood to coal to natural gas. Now they're starting to see why people said nuclear from 50, 60, 70 years ago, because of the pure aspect of energy density.
Right.
Yeah, so like, just as a pure hypothetical now, I know you guys got good imaginations. Could you imagine, for instance, on your mobile phone or cell phone, for those as you're Americans, could you imagine if you had a battery that had the same energy density as nuclear materials, such as uranium? How many times would you have to charge it?
Probably never.
Exactly. Now, one aspect which is what kind of annoys me when people talk about electric vehicles is energy density is their biggest problem. Because even the best lithium-ion batteries in the world are still vastly inferior per kilo compared to conventional gasoline or diesel. And that's something that people seem to ignore when they're talking about. There's a reason why an electric car, if you give all those bloody batteries, Tesla knows this as well, so Elon Musk will say I'm correct on this, so I'm not slagging Tesla off here, or any electric car company for this, but it's just a simple fact that the amount of batteries you require to hold the energy to be able to go a long range, let's say 300, 400, 500 miles, you take up so much space, and that all that weight, compared to a conventional petrol diesel car, where putting a bigger fuel tank may add, an extra couple of kilos at most?
Right.
Whereas if you want to make an electric car go, let's say, 300 miles to 400 miles, that's going to be a good 100, 200 kilos in weight and resources.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the things that this Chad A. Hogg guy talks about a lot is, a lot of the environmental movement is living in a fantasy land. This idea, and he makes the joke about algae farts and stuff too, that really futurism and environmentalism kind of don't really go together at this point in time, unless we come up with something really awesome. Now, I'm not anti-nuclear energy. I don't want to point that out, but there's something to be said at the fact that whatever alternative fuel source you have outside of fossil fuels is not completely divorced of fossil fuels themselves in their logistics. So yeah, nuclear is great, and I wouldn't have no problem living down the street from a nuclear power plant, but I don't necessarily see it as something that's going to solve our consumption problem.
Well, I will say on the consumption aspect, and this kind of goes into the oil aspect. One thing I don't think people need to understand is we do need to restructure our economies in the West. We do need to restructure it. Now, one material I don't personally want to sound like a complete hippie here, but one material that can solve a lot of our issues regarding to the use of fossil fuels actually is the material hemp. Because
what was it?
Hemp, HEMP.
Oh yeah.
Because you could use that as a fuel to like burn stuff compared to like natural oil. You could use it for clothing because obviously we use oil for garning our clothes. stuff like that. So you can have something like that because it's easy to grow, renewables, all that stuff, easily recyclable. Use that, and therefore you take stress away from the fossil fuels, and let's say keep it to something that's where there isn't really much of an alternative. So effectively, you're specializing certain materials and resources for very specific tasks, but allowing something else, you could say the market, to come in and replace it.
Well, yeah, no, that's absolutely true, and the market actually plays a lot of role. But before we get into that, kind of what I want to get back to is I'm not a science mind. I don't know. I can't even spell science. I don't even think about it. But the way I look at it is you've got all these people like, Greta Thunberg and, these other types, Charles Schwab, I guess, that are always talking about how, the world's going to end in 12 years or whatever. If they really believe that, then you would think there would be massive cause for a reduction in consumption. You would think that would be part of it. If they were being honest, it would be like, hey, Amazon, you're constantly shipping around, 5-pound packages in their own cardboard boxes. Maybe stop doing that because it's probably bad on the environment. But they're not doing that. And everyone, I'm as guilty as anyone about ordering shit I don't need on Amazon. So I'm not here to throw stones.
Greta leaves, doesn't go to school and flies around the world. Of course, she did take a boat the one time, I guess, to be more carbon efficient. Yeah, but it's rules for thee, but not for me. I mean, usually that's the way it goes. It's that you're not worthy. It literally is for these people. They are special. They have special rights. They get to do what they like, but you don't, and you have to change your life in order to save the world. Generally, I know I've said it before, but my answer is when people say that the Earth is overpopulated, I'm like, well, you first. You can help. Just jump off the cliff.
It's funny you mentioned that, right? This is what makes me laugh, right? And this brings me on to a major hypocrisy regarding this subject, right? I'll wait till Bill to get back, but this.
Oh, I'm right here. I'm putting on a sweater, man.
Okay, no worries. This really drives me heading, right? We keep on hearing about the West has low birth rates, okay? Or below replacement birth rates, right? We're all below 2.1. But I don't see these same people demanding this on the third world where they're having as much as like 5 kids, as high as 5 kids, right? They're not demanding them to cut down their birth rates, considering they're the ones who are literally rapidly growing. Like, for example, the continent of Africa, their population has doubled within my lifetime, within 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's outrageous. What do you think is going to happen in another 30 years? Easily going to double again. Maybe even higher, because they'll have better infant mortality rate. And where do you think they're going to migrate?
Well, Hans Rosling, who worked for the UN, I tend to take anything that comes out of the UN with a grain of salt, but Hans Rosling explained this, that what we see as far as birth rate decline is more family planning, more birth control, and why we see that has more to do with capitalism or just wealth creation, the fact that people get wealthier.
Yeah.
So as other societies, including Muslim societies, which we know have a very high birth rate, they actually, as they get richer, they tend to have less children.
I know of this. It's known as the economic demographic paradox. But what does make me laugh about that is that technically speaking, people talk about low fertility, low testosterone, demographics and all that. Everyone seems to also ignore that. Ironically enough, in the West, we did have replacement birth rates right up until the 1970s came along, which was after the Cultural Revolution, and then it started to drop.
Well, a lot of that too, right, is these leftist mentalities that we're talking about, like of environmentalism. Oh, if I have a child, I'm hurting the earth, and people going around going, oh, I just can't see bringing a child into this world because it's so cruel. I had a conversation with a woman once who was like, I'm a teacher. Well, I was basically calling her weak. I told her she was weak-minded or whatever else because she wouldn't have children. And I'm like, she's like, well, I can't see bringing children into this world. And I go, okay, then your legacy will die with you. You'll have nothing ever to, your legacy ends with you. Your genetic line ends with you. You have nothing to contribute to this world. And she's like, I'm a teacher. I inspire these kids. I'm like, I don't know how many teachers who were ever truly influential in my life, but it was only a few, and they really didn't shape me that much.
Well, this is how you can tell that that's all propaganda. You'll hear these, and you hear that a lot. You know, the antinatalists, like, oh, I can't bring a child in the world; it's going to be too hard on the environment. The fact that you feel like you need to sit in a temperature-controlled room for every moment of your life has a lot more impact on the environment than having a child.
Well, yeah,
the fact that you need to have all these useless items that you consume throughout your life has a much bigger issue than it's like when people say, oh, if you stop eating red meat, it's good for the environment. Which do you think is better for the environment? Me going 20 miles down the street to buy a steak from a farmer, or having ripe avocados on a shelf in Wisconsin year round?
Yeah, they take like 20 years to grow and a ton of water.
Yeah.
Kizza, did you watch the UK show Utopia when it came out, or recently, or anything like that? Have you seen that?
I haven't myself, but it's funny Tank mentioned that, because I did want to get on to this point, and this was the hypocrisy aspect. How can those same people can say with a straight face, we need to have low birth rates because of the environment, but at the same time be perfectly A-OK with mass international travel and mass migration?
Well, funny you should mention that, because there's another guy I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
So this guy, you may have heard of him. His name is Pentti Linkola. He was a Finnish fisherman. Okay, so he is. They call this guy an eco-fascist. Yeah. Funny. A certain person in freaking New Zealand last year was actually an eco such and such, but they all seem to ignore that. Yeah. So this guy, he was born in 1930. He was a Finnish fisherman, and he's an environmentalist, but he's kind of a dissident environmentalist, and he's criticized because he's saying exactly what you're saying, that if you're going to have an environmental policy, you cannot have unlimited immigration. And he's noted with coming up with this, what they call, I think it's called lifeboat ethics. It's probably on this page, but basically saying, if you're in a country, we're going to call it a lifeboat.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of people, and the lifeboat's full, and there's a bunch of people trying to get into the lifeboat. Then it's going to sink the whole boat, and everyone's going to die. So the most ethical thing to do, and he says this, is to get an axe and start chopping off arms, which is a pretty spicy take. But ultimately, he's saying, kind of what we're talking about here, that the environmental outlook is to really for countries to take care of themselves. It's not about being this global pressure release valve. Of course, he's called racist for saying this, but ultimately he's saying, if you care about environmentalism, and especially with the guys that are raving about it now, like the world's going to explode in 10 years. The policies you're coming up with don't match.
But this goes back to the propaganda aspect of it. What are the real, I don't think that these people who are at the top in charge, heading these things, these ideas, and pushing them, are so stupid to think that this is actually going to work. Their ideas are actually going to work. I don't think that at all. I think that they know it's nonsense. I think I guarantee you Al Gore knew everything he was pushing was nonsense over the years. And they say these things because it's about power, it's about control, it's about change. And like I said, a lot of this movement of demographics and population seems to be to depopulate these areas. And I think that these folks think that they can control these other populations, right, for various reasons, or that it'll cause chaos. I'm a firm believer that we've been in the Middle East for decades to cause chaos, to justify reasons to continue to be in the Middle East.
I would say that's blatantly obvious to anyone who's ever paid attention to history.
Right.
This kind of goes back, and also going back to partially shield one of your earlier video from a few weeks ago, Bill, your video on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This brings up another point where it's completely illogical to have mass migration when knowing full well the Fourth Industrial Revolution is coming, and that's going to put millions upon millions of people out of work.
At the same time, though, to develop continents like Africa is going to take far more money to build the infrastructure and the things they need, considering the vast amount of land and lack of infrastructure that many of the nations of Africa don't have, versus in the European continent or Eurasia, or in you go further on into East Asia, or here in the United States, North America. There's a lot of infrastructure already set up. So is it not easier in their mind to bring those people forward instead of building up all these other infrastructures? And you're right, there will be a lack of work, but I think they like that. They want that, because then you're on the dime, you're on the dole. You are in that fourth industrial revolution, connected to everybody and everything. You own nothing, right? As they say, and then they can cut you off if you get out of line. Oh, you're a political dissident, you don't agree with us? Hey, guess what? You can't use your Visa or MasterCard anymore. And that, my friend, is happening now. PayPal has done that. Who else has done that? I don't know.
Banks have done that.
Yeah,
PayPal have done that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, all this goes back to my general Christian beliefs of the idea of the mark of the beast. A man may buy or sell. And to me, I don't think that that's just a thing that happens at the end of time, but this has happened throughout history. You don't have the proper ideas, the proper beliefs. You don't worship the proper ideologies, the proper government, whatever it is, whatever that overlord is. If you're not in line with them, hey, you're cut off. Good luck. Good luck living in society. Good luck getting food for your family. And
it's not just that. Sorry to interrupt, but I do remember hearing a story about this woman in China who quite literally could not have a bank account. So they literally have to go around carrying briefcases full of money. Like, I mean, today, how are you supposed to function without a bank account in today's society? Like how? What kind of person, when you go to a job, how are you supposed to get a paycheck without a bank account? Because if you don't get a bank account, and an employer takes you, you're effectively doing cash in hand, in which case that could be considered tax evasion.
And this is why the understanding how fiat currency works is so important. This is also why, though, I'm not a fan, and I know because you and I have talked about this a month or two ago about crypto, but this is why I'm not a fan of crypto, because it's not a commodity. It's not something you can hold and possess. And at some point, let's say that the crypto is encoded in a way that no one can mess with it. Fine. But what if they cut off your system? I got my phone right here. If I use my crypto through this or the computer that I'm talking on right now, and they just say, "Oh, we can cut this circuit or that circuit," whatever it is. I'm not a tech guy, but whatever it is, if they can cut it off. I don't like using biometrics for exchange of money, or my phone. A lot of people put their banking information in their phone so they can scan their phone. I'm like, you're insane.
I mean, like, for me, like, when it comes to that stuff, like, I don't have my credit cards on my phone, or my bank cards on my phone, but I could check on my online banking, so I could see without having to go to an ATM.
Right, and no, I do that, but that's not the same thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, this kind of goes back to, because I remember speaking to somebody a couple of weeks ago about this, like, he was doing a thing about the cashless society, and I'm just like, that is very dangerous, and that's effectively one stage of aspect of communism, which kind of makes me laugh with Klaus Graf, the founder of the World Economic Forum, who wants to push a cashless society. I'm just like, Klaus, you do realize that's one aspect of communism, right? And I'm not sure if he's actually thought this through, because, like, listen, you may not call yourself a communist, but you are advocating for one aspect of communism. I'm just like, we tried before cashless societies. I mean, this goes back to my old video I talked about with Glenn Jacobs. We tried using cigarettes. We tried using livestock. We tried using seashells and all that. The most effective method we found was with precious metals, gold and silver. We've done it for 2,500 years. Why change it? Why change it? It simply works. And yes, there is a finite amount of resources, but guess what? That works because it brings about rarity, and therefore it gives it value. Like, a good example of this with the automotive sector, the Ferrari 250 GTO, the most expensive car ever made, most expensive car to buy. You want to buy one right now, you need like $25 million, because there's like 5 or 6 of them. Now just imagine if there was, I don't know, 50 million of them, like F-150 pickup trucks are in the United States. Would they still sell for $25 million? No chance. They'll be worth freaking pennies. It's the same logic. Sorry. So, Sorry. So yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, that stuff does me heading, and like, I mean, cryptocurrencies could potentially work if they function similar to, let's say, like credit cards. But the issue is, like, I do think there may be a question, maybe in the next few years, where governments are going to have to say, they're going to have to, ironically enough, make services like PayPal effectively a public commodity. As in, if you try and cancel people out of the system, you effectively basically unperson them. They can't function in society. So I do think there's going to have to be some major rule changes or legislation to bring this in, because at the end of the day, it's not like the old days where, like, you didn't necessarily need a bank account. As long as you had cash on you, it's fine. Nowadays, because everything's so tech reliant and all interconnected, if you don't have a bank account, you're basically fucked.
Well, I think a lot of this is why Tank is kind of fond of like of monarchies and all. It's just that there wasn't a big technocracy. Of course, my argument and would always be that in the modern world, though, there's a technocracy, so it doesn't matter if it's a monarch or not. If you're against whomever, you can be unpersoned, you can be canceled, and it's all about who has the power, who has the control, who has the influence, and also who's willing to sell their soul. Because, man, I don't think most of Hollywood really, gives a crap about any of this stuff, but they sure are willing to sell their soul to promote it, and people think that they're cool. I love my wife. I'm not trying to give her a hard time or anything, but like when she says stuff to me about like, oh, I love that person, like some Hollywood star, I'm like, you don't know them, you don't know anything about them. They're probably a POS, and I get you like the work that they make. I mean, I can say that there's certain actors or actresses I enjoy, or film directors that I enjoy their material. In fact, I wanted to do film when I was young, but that's not the same thing to me. Like, oh, I idolize or love them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the thing that does make me laugh, because another thing I just thought of as well is for instance, a good example, right? This is what kind of makes me laugh about social media and the way the banks are, and especially now the banks are going versus, let's say, the phone companies. Like, for instance, right now, we could be on the phone, and let's say we want to do something very, very naughty. The phone company don't just all of a sudden cut our lines off now, do they?
No.
Exactly. So, could you imagine the phone company started acting that way? I think there would be major lawsuits up the ass, because they would say, hold on, I'm paying you a product, I could use it however I like. So I do think, especially with recent talks about Silicon Valley and with the banking infrastructure, I do think we're going to see some. This is why I bring up the legislation aspect. We could see some legislation to where government basically tells these companies, look, what you're trying to do now, you're not doing that stuff anymore, or you're going to be shut down for good. And you may need this, where, like, I'm not one pro like authoritarianism or pro big government, but you might need a complete grade A child born to unmarried parents to give these companies a good slap in the face to say no more.
Yeah, and that's kind of the issue. And Bill's absolutely right. We live in a technocracy now. Like, we're not. You're not going to be able to close that back. You can't put that genie back in the bottle.
No. But, like, I'm not saying we should stop it. All I'm just saying is right. Okay, you've allowed this genie in the lamp. Well, guess what? You better put some solid borders around that genie.
Yeah. The hard part, I think we'd probably all agree, is that who can we trust, or even who would even be willing to do that?
I mean, I would.
Everyone vote for Kizza.
Well, I would, but sadly, nah. Problem is, there's too much gatekeeping in UK politics. But this is the issue where, like, it's like what I studied in field. Yeah, it is heavily technical, because I did obviously motorsport engineering. But the difference in, let's say, that industry compared to many other industries is that in my industry, if someone screws up, their head is being dragged, figuratively speaking, of course, straight down to the courts, and they're going to answer some questions. Because if, let's say, I build a product and someone has a very serious accident in them, I could be sued on the spot because I built the product. Because ultimately, I'm guessing you guys heard of the concept of industrial manslaughter.
No, what is that?
Basically, if let's say hypothetically, let's say I'm a part of a team that builds, let's say, a new Boeing, and it goes out on a flight. Let's say something malfunctions and that plane crashes and everyone dies on it. Me and the rest of the team are all being dragged to court for 3, 4, 500 accounts of industrial manslaughter.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So yeah, and the reason why they're so brutal is the fact that, as my tutor said, engineers should not have the power to dictate who lives.
Right.
Because you're effectively trying to basically play God with people. Now, the ironic thing is with, let's say, the aerospace industry, when you think about it, flying should be the most dangerous form of travel, but it's actually the safest because we think of all the ways that everything that could go wrong and do everything within our power to prevent it.
Well, look, I just made a video last night. I entitled it "Elitist Technocracy: The Great Reset is Here, the COOF Excuse, and Why Masks Are Symbols of Compliance." Right, and that's what we're seeing. I've been looking over. I look over the data so much. This is all I really do. And it's like there are so many excess deaths right now, and 25 to 45 or 44-year-olds, something like that, in the United States, something like 75,000 or so. And all the papers from all the experts are sitting there going, well, this is obviously due to the coronavirus, even though we don't have the conclusive evidence of it. Then you go in and you look at the data specifically. You look at all the deaths this past year, or at least that they have measured so far, the 75,000 or so. And then you see that there were 2,000 attributed COOF deaths. And you do the math on that, and it's 3%. But yet somehow all of a sudden excess deaths that they're talking about are all from the COOF, and it makes up 3%. And then there's other data, of course, that is out there sitting there. If we look over the last couple of years in the United States, that actually the death rate has gone down in the U.S. in the last year, and it's usually like somewhere between 2.8 and 2.5 million, and we're closer to that 2.5 million this past year. And I've seen this too. I read a BBC article early on where a doctor was talking about, well, we'll probably go back and adjust the rate of excess deaths based on these people probably would have died within a year anyways, because they were elderly, had heart disease, renal failure, all those kind of things. But it doesn't matter. The technocracy is saying, no, you can't question that. You're wrong. You're wrong about any of that. You can't question it. If you do, I mean, hell, we're on YouTube right now. You'll get banned. Now, they haven't been as bad lately about it, but it's the same thing with the election stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it does make me laugh when people put excess deaths. And I'm like, you're effectively throwing all deaths under one roof. Like, do you know how intellectually dishonest that is? For instance, like how intellectually dishonest that is.
You all right, Kiz?
Sorry, interruptions. Do apologize.
Okay, no worries.
With family. So
we didn't know if you dropped out. That's all.
No, just interruptions. So yeah, as I was saying, you're throwing all these deaths under one roof, under one roof, without distinguishing how did each individual person actually die. So, for instance, they put in excess deaths right now is something like over 66,000, and that's based on a COVID test within 28 days. And I'm just like, that's a poor example of how many deaths there are. And I would not be surprised, give it next year or the next couple of years, we'll look back on this and realize that numbers are vastly lower than what they really were. But then what also makes me laugh about this with this boat party, as we called it yesterday, if it was really as dangerous as they said it is, why didn't the so-called globalists go, no, we got to, quote-unquote, shut everything down, effectively terminate international travel, shut the borders down, etc., to save millions of lives? Because as China, South Korea, and Taiwan all proved, you terminate international travel, boat parties can't, it's much harder for a boat party to reach you. I mean, last I checked there with Japan, there are 2,000 deaths. 2,000 deaths with a country of 126 million people, heavily densely populated. What's
Right.
and what's the excuse for the rest of the world?
The
Especially
Danes have had very few deaths as well, and they just put out a study in November about masks, and there is no mask mandate in Denmark, as far as I am aware. There's no mask mandate in Japan either, or a lot of these countries. People don't understand that Japan, they won't go against their constitution because they actually hold their politicians accountable. And the only thing the government ever did really was recommend, like, don't open, don't do mass transit, don't do this, don't do that, and people did what they wanted to do. And that's all I want. Just let the population choose.
Well, I mean, at least with Japan, at least with Japan's case, what's unique about Japan? I'm not sure how it is with South Korea, but I know this is the case of Japan. They are quite, I guess you could say, germophobic, as in they are very big on cleanliness when it comes to use of products. So, for example, something I do remember seeing, which to those of us in the West, this would sound utterly ridiculous. But let's say you're in a store, like a big multinational store that has multiple levels and it has elevators, right? Mm-hmm. They have someone in the elevator paid purely to press the buttons. Why? Because to stop diseases spreading. I'm not joking you. Literally, they'll pay somebody, wearing masks or whatever, with wearing gloves to press the buttons to take people to whatever level they want in the lift. That sounds ridiculous, but they do it because of basically how germs are spread. Like, they're massive germaphobes over there. And also the whole thing about wearing masks, they've naturally done that during flu seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they also, but again, it goes back to their high density and all those things. But they also have a higher life expectancy if you take out the high suicide rate there, which by the way has been going up.
But that's
especially amongst women, and of course, if anyone knows anything about psychology, women are more neurotic than men. This is cross culturally, and so they're more likely to experience depression and suicidal thoughts and stuff like that. I read an article earlier today that there's actually suicide rates are going up amongst blacks in Chicago, and Black Americans are actually one of the lowest risk groups for suicide. So it's interesting. Yeah. I'll probably be doing a video Monday or Tuesday about all that, because I'm like I said, I'm going through the data. I cover whatever I want to cover, but I'm kind of on this thing right now with the Great Reset and the COOF.
Yeah. So. I know. Yeah. I mean, but it's obviously with Japan's case, it just makes me laugh. Like, especially in the UK, because ultimately we're an island as well. I would like him to take some ideas from Japan, because I do think Japan is a great example of what happens when you have a very technologically advanced society, right? Because, phenomenal public service. They have a literal bullet train that is incredibly good. It's very clean, despite how densely populated they are and stuff like that. But they're also a big warning sign regarding the question of psychological health. Because, and also the pension aspect, because their pension system's utterly screwed. Because, I'm not sure if you guys know, they have a mandatory retirement age of 60 years old. But their life expectancy, last I checked, is around 85 to 86. Which is like the highest in the world, excluding tax havens like Monaco. Like, that is a financial black hole to pay people 25 years to live on welfare.
Yeah, well, that's kind of stuff though too. Like, I don't like there's a point where you can't work for some people, but I don't like the idea of retirement. I think that's a luxury of the modern world, and I think it's silly. I think work gives you purpose. And to a large degree, human beings are just beasts of burden. We need to work. It's why when people don't work in, like, say, the Appalachian areas, the poor areas where Tank and I live, that there is like a high alcohol addiction rate, high drug addiction. The opioid crisis hit here very badly. I don't know about in your area, Tank, but here in West Virginia, of course, it was quite horrific for a while. And that's gone down. But all of this has been, when we saw the same thing in Scotland, man, when they had a huge heroin epidemic, they didn't have their economy was not doing well at the time, right? So
it was horrendous. Quite a few years ago, yeah. but this kind of goes back to my point about retirement. Initially, this is an old joke, right? And I know this because of the days of talks with Milton Friedman when he spoke about Social Security. He pointed out very accurately that when Social Security was first implemented, the people who were first onto it, so that would be the silent generation, if memory serves, or might have been the greatest generation, one of the two, they got an extremely good deal out of it. But those of us in our age group, we're going to get an extremely raw deal out of it.
But yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But also what he pointed out, which a lot of people have pointed out, is the day of retirement and the pension stuff has not evolved and updated as time's gone on. So I think when you come to, let's say, the baby boomer generation, they were freaking loving it. They had a massive pot of gold, effectively, right, waiting for them. But when it comes to our time to retirement, we're going to have next to nothing there. Or hell, we might even have a pension by the time we get to that age.
Yeah, we're kind of the same way with Social Security here in the United States. And interestingly, in other nations that generally manage their politicians better, like Sweden, they switched most of their pensions over to private accounts. They privatized them, which there has been an argument here in the United States to do with Social Security. And generally Democrats don't want to do that. And of course, the mainstream media doesn't like the idea either. And it's like, why?
Yeah,
why? That's the better way to go.
I just thought, let me pose a question. I just thought about something. So either one of you can answer this. How would you define eugenics?
Oof.
Like just off the cuff, like in a sentence, how do you think you'd define it?
Oof, that's a big one there. Well, I do know Richard Dawkins got into major trouble for this on Twitter a few months back. But technically, you would is eugenics as in trying to get rid of defected genes and diseases. Mm-hmm. But then also you could argue specific breeding, you could argue is a form of eugenics as well, like with racehorses or what people do with breeding dogs and stuff like that. So I guess you could say eugenics in a sense is not necessarily natural selection, not say natural selection by nature, but you could say controlled natural selection, I guess you could say, to a point.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And it just kind of dawned on me just now. The average young male of our age, 20s, 30s, whatever, we've been bred, so to speak, into a situation where we are vastly less self-sufficient than our forefathers.
Yes, but
that's all social engineering.
Well, that's but that's something. Right. It seems
like if you want to talk about eugenics, not that Kizza is wrong in his definition, but if you look at really what the people who were pushing eugenics in the past were talking about, they were talking about not breeding stupid people and breeding them out of society and not allowing them to have power and to eventually. That's what got into the whole Nazi thing with the master race. Part of that was the Übermensch from Nietzsche. Now, Nietzsche was more or less talking about someone who could live outside of religion and not worship the state. But still, they took that idea from Nietzsche. And all that was very common in the 1800s. And even before that, it comes out of Darwinism, of course, largely. And it was really an elitist idea about, well, we need to breed only the good people, only the special kind. Really, dude, look, I always say, we go back to Plato's Republic, all right? As far as Western history goes, we'll go back to Plato's Republic, and we talk about the guardian class, and that they would be bred up properly, and they would only have the best genes, and that only the beautiful people would be allowed to breed, the beautiful and intelligent people, all that stuff. These ideas are very old, and I think that on the surface, we can talk about whatever Dawkins might have said or Kizza's definition. The reality is it's all about population control. It's all about social engineering,
Yeah.
Well, I bring that. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say that's how you can define it. Obviously, I was speaking examples how you could define it.
Right.
And Dawkins made reference to it how we do this all the time with racehorses and dogs.
Well, Yeah, and I think so. So if you take something like if you take something like,
man, I wouldn't compare people to horses and dogs, but sure.
well,
Yeah.
I think he's onto something in a certain sense, and just follow me down this rabbit hole.
Sure
So no one's going to look at a pug dog or a Welsh corgi and say that is the pinnacle of evolution. That's not, but they came about because of a system. Someone decided that this is how the dog should look because whatever, and so they bred it.
Yeah,
could it be argued, and I think I am arguing this, could it be argued that our society, our system, however you want to define it, has bred us to be less self-sustaining on purpose? And I say that to kind of to go back to what we're talking about the retirement age.
Tank.
If we were as sorry, I'll let you get to where you're going. Let me just finish this. If we were as self-reliant as our great grandfathers, our retirement age wouldn't matter. You would work, even if you just worked a wage job or whatever for most of your life, you're retired at whatever, you spend your twilight years, raising chickens and eating turnips and smoking cigars on your back porch. You would, but we're so reliant on the system to take, technology or whatever you want to call it, that we can't do that anymore. We can't just retire in peace without some huge bloated bureaucracy to kind of hold up this house of cards.
Yeah. So, a few thoughts on that, because this is something I had thought out many years ago. I just sent you in the private chat, just the Russian silver fox thing. You can look this up if you want to bring it up on screen, whatever. Otherwise, we can just talk about it. Okay, but there was a Russian silver fox experiment some years ago where they bred, I don't know what it was, 20 generations, 25, something like that, in a few years. And they were trying to make the silver foxes more docile so they could get their furs more easily. And so what they did is they started selecting for not timidness per se, but selecting away from aggression. So they didn't want foxes that would cower in a cage.
I know of this. Sorry to interrupt. I know of this. It's known as the domestication experiment.
Yeah. And so they didn't want, they didn't seek out, though, just necessarily to domesticate. They just were trying to get foxes that were more easy to handle when before they killed them and skinned them and all that stuff. But aside from whatever ethics or morals people might think about that, the thing is the foxes that were aggressive, they didn't breed, and the foxes that were cowering, they didn't breed. It was the ones that were kind of neutral. And what they found was it created not only a different and completely different coat of the foxes, but they did domesticate them in just a few generations. And they started having neonatal features, meaning they started looking like babies. Mm-hmm. Now, if we can extrapolate this out to human society, what have we always done throughout human societies until recently with the worst and worst of all society? And
violence.
That's right. We've murdered them. Usually by some sort of judicial process. We've either removed them from society completely, we hung them, we beheaded them, we did whatever. So in a way, what inadvertently we could have potentially have done has created basically less of a gene pool for the most violent people in society. If you look at rates of psychopathy, it's generally held that it's only about 2% of the population. And even amongst that 2%, not all people who are psychopathic are necessarily evil intention. Some of them kind of know how to control it. A lot of people who don't have any fear, people like myself, generally speaking, who probably should have more fear than I do. It could be said that we're, sheepdogs, if you would, as some people put it, like I believe it was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman in his book on killing. Not a huge fan of his or anything, but he does make some good cogent points, by the way, if you're interested in looking at the psychology and history of killing a man. I think a lot of the stuff he puts out, it's a bunch of liberal nonsense too. But aside from that, but yeah, like if you think about it, over time, we have selected for that. And then on top of that, if you started thinking about within the Western world and Christianity, where violence is generally looked down upon, right? Unlike in the Muslim world, where violence is, that gets you to heaven, depending on what kind of, if it's righteous or not. you're breeding different types of people. And then we have to look at selection biases of women who, if you look into the genetic history of things, you have twice as many female ancestors as men, meaning that most men didn't get to breed. And a lot of those men were young men who died out in war immediately. So what men did survive? Was it the more passive men? Was it the more sickly men? Was it men who were more intelligent, but maybe less violent? It's hard to say, but I'm just saying all these factors have taken place over the centuries. I think one thing you and I do agree on for sure, Tank, is that we're a weak society, man. We are very feminized as men, and we have no tolerance for any sort of pain or suffering. And I mean suffering as in the classical sense of the word, meaning to have endurance, to have to carry on, to have to struggle through life. I actually mentioned that once to a friend of mine some years ago. I was talking on Facebook or something. And I was like, about how life is suffering. And she's like, that's so pessimistic. Da, 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 da. I'm like, do you even understand what the word suffering means? I'm like, you have to suffer for everything. If I'm going to be good at wrestling or jiu-jitsu or kickboxing, I have to suffer through that. If I want to learn something, I have to suffer through the book that I'm reading to understand more. I have to keep pushing. I have to endure. It's not always pleasant. It's not always fun. But you need to make yourself better, right?
Well, it's the same. It's the same aspect with forging. What do you do to forge a sword? You freaking heat it up to the point where it's about to melt, and then you bash it to the shape you desire. But once you've done and you cool it off, you end up with a superior weapon afterwards. It's no different to working out. You go through the pain and sweat and frustration of working out to the point where you can lose yourself 20 pounds or gain 50% of muscle mass. You see the people who live life, do gym life 24/7. You see them, they're freaking heavily disciplined, and that's one aspect of society that's definitely gone out the window is discipline.
Yeah. Self-restraint, as well as that's a part of discipline, but self-restraint as well, I think. It's almost encouraged to be an asshole in society anymore, as long as you have the right politics,
Yeah, I mean, there was a joking saying with Europe many years ago, how we were described by certain Europeans as polite but foolish. They used to think that up until we started to get violent, and then they saw what we were really like, and then they thought twice. Because that's something the Brits, historically speaking, they had a good double edge in the sense that we can be very polite and very persuasive, but if we want to be violent, oh boy, we will be utter savages if we have to.
Well, I think culturally, I don't know about the Scots, but the English and the Welsh, I would say culturally, have always been more like a little bit more of a, self-restrained kind of, be polite, hold back your emotions. At least that's the perception for most Americans. So, yeah.
I mean, the Scots. For Scotland itself, they're perhaps maybe on average a little bit more aggressive, but I will say they have a harsher climate to deal with. So let's say, for instance, if you take of quote unquote traditional Viking mentality, you're fighting the elements 24/7. So you have to be a pretty tough SOB, or you're not going to survive. So, which is why it's common, for instance, those of, let's say, the Balkan states or Russia, they're naturally considered, they've got a natural tough guy sort of aura about them because, they're surviving the elements.
And this is kind of, I know we're talking about this a little bit before the stream, but this is kind of why I'm tech skeptical. And Bill touched on something earlier when he said, that humans ultimately we're beasts of burden, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but that is actually a very Kaczynski-esque thought. Who we've talked about, I'm a fan of, and I think, and that's the reason why
Tank don't Tank is not a fan of the Unabomber. All right.
Well, I mean,
he's a fan of his writings, not of his actions. Let's be fair.
We'll just say this: I like what he wrote, but I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of voting by mail.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, this kind of goes back to the point about the fourth industrial revolution. That's going to bring about major questions, because a good question I did post in a group I'm in, and it did got a lot of hostility here, but it was a good question we had to ask. What happens, hypothetically, in the next 10 years? Science perfects an artificial womb to produce humans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's say someone cracks it, and you could get effectively you could breed a baby in a womb, an artificial womb, and it's no different to a natural birth. What happens then? Does that effectively remove women's power in terms of the relationship dynamic? What happens then? Do we say all in on this and say if anyone wants to have a baby, say yeah, here's your genetic data, come back 9 months, we'll get you a nice healthy baby?
From my perspective, I don't know if you're posing this rhetorically or not, but from my
future question.
From my perspective, it seems it does the same thing that all technology does. It alienates humans from their natural core. So normally, ideally, if you want to have a baby, you marry someone, and then the fact that you guys have a good bond and came up with this idea to have, and I know this doesn't happen every time, obviously, but you have your wife or whatever, and you have a good bond, and you decide to have children because you believe that together you can raise this child, in a world and give them the proper upbringing. The technology for artificial womb, I believe, would ultimately remove a lot of that dynamic. And then you got a lot of people saying, well, I don't really need to have a relationship to have a baby because I can just stick my genes in here. And then now I have this very atomized society already where, all these organizations want me to consume all these crappy little products, Fight Club status, his little man cave or whatever. And then you're just adding a child into that. And then they never know, the sacrifice and the pain. The pain and the social necessity that came before the child was even born that gets passed on, but for me, it's just an extension of the problem with technology as it stands right now, is that it's ultimately very alienating to the human society.
Well, it's not just alienating, but like you said, because of that lack of socialization, there's going to be more mental health issues and all the other things. It's interesting because you mentioned futurist earlier, and if you think of futurist type predictions within like science fiction, a simple movie, which is a great movie, I think, we can go back to WALL-E and see that this world of these people who are obese, that haven't used their muscles in years, and everything is just given to them, or Idiocracy, to the fact that people have only the dumb people kept breeding, and the smart ones, as we talked earlier, because they're all environmentalists. We don't want the environmental cost to hurt people and to hurt the environment, so we're not going to have children. Well, what does happen over time? Well, you get people who don't care. I think I see a lot of that now. There is evidence. I'm not convinced on the argument because I've seen it both ways, but there is evidence that IQ is declining in the West, especially in the United States. For certain, the education system, the more it's been centralized in the United States, the more that has declined. That is, you cannot argue against that.
Sorry to interrupt. I have seen the data question because a certain Stefan Molyneux did a video on this last year, if memory serves, before he obviously got kicked. And I do remember this, and it said across multiple Western countries, United States, UK, Australia, and a couple others, there was a decline for the first time in recorded history in average IQ. However,
there's also a slowdown of technology that's been going on right now. Most people don't realize the tech explosion. It blew up, but now it's kind of just dwindling down. So there are these multiple factors there.
Yeah, but what's funny is if you ever bothered to look up the average IQ rates, average IQ across multiple countries, you'll notice a constant correlation. But you'll notice how the West is effectively ported in people from predominantly countries with less than 85 IQ, predominantly. How is that not going to have an effect on dropping? We're going to end up on the wrong side of the bell curve when it comes to IQ.
Well, that goes to a deeper question, though, of how do we raise IQ? And the only thing that we know for sure that does is nutrition. But for me, I think IQ gets raised through other factors as well, like socialization. So if you look at if you look at studies, go ahead, Kiz.
I was just going to say, there is 3 known factors I do know of which does improve IQ, but it's not absolute, but there is a consistent trend with this. One is culture, believe it or not. Certain cultures do tend to provide consistently above average IQ. So, for instance, when people say, why is it that, let's say, those of a certain religious identity persistently produce people above 100 IQ versus other cultures where they're persistently below 90, culture does play a huge role. So if you have a culture that demands, let's say, classical conservatism, in a sense, I would call it, hard work, study, stay in school, stay in college, go to university, etc., they tend to produce this. However, there is also the other aspect where there is elements of a genetic aspect to it, but then there's also the question of, for instance, the autistic mindset, whereas those who are autistic can have very, very, very high IQ, but socially speaking, they are effectively dummies, to put it politely. So
well,
there is that.
Yeah. This kind of gets to what I was saying, though. There's a social element to it. There is evidence based on feral children.
Yeah.
That your ability to understand certain things will go down. For instance, if you do not speak, you do not develop speech patterns in your developing years, your brain has not made those neural connections and will not learn to speak after a certain age. I think after you're 10 or 11, you will never learn how to speak. They like I said, they found feral children in the last century, and this seems to be the case. Socialization is very important, but also movement. And if you know anything about biology, I have to be trained in biology to a decent extent. Your brain is really set up as a big information absorber. Your entire nervous system, much of what goes in to your nervous system and your immediate actions is based in the spinal cord alone. Your brain doesn't even have to really process it. But what it is really meant to do is to absorb the world around you so you can observe and figure out what's a danger, what's not, all that. That's learning. And then on top of that, what your body is also developing its brain for movement. And since we have high articulation as a species, a lot of your brain is geared toward movement. So movement and basically sensing things are the primary things that your nervous system does, aside from the autonomic functions like breathing, heartbeat, digestion, that kind of stuff. But what this says to me is that in a culture that increasingly gets less and less socialized with other people, especially with little boys, discourages little boys to roughhouse and play hard. There's less physical labor around. There's less inundation from the outside environment, right? We are in these very, very controlled environments now. If you go out in the woods, man, I guarantee you get really, really alert. We know that if you're someone like me who suffers from insomnia, and my circadian rhythms all over the place, and I have weird sleeping patterns, if I go out into the woods for like a week, all that will be reset. Because there's a certain amount of information and stimulation that nature and the lighting patterns and whatever else that your body adjusts to. And so I would say if there's a decline in IQ, potentially it's because there's not proper developmental things going on in the brain. Now, if we talk about certain demographic groups that do experience some more of these hardships and whatever else, well, that's where the socialization aspect comes in, as far as the culture, as far as learning. Like, are you teaching language and mathematics at a young age? Are you teaching things that are going to encourage growth of neurons and neural patterns within the brain? Or are you teaching very, very basic survival skills? And you'll have to think much deeper than that. And of course, again, nutrition, huge. We know that nutrition is a huge part of it. And I always point back to Weston Price's work, who in the 1920s and 30s flew around the world, where there were still a lot of isolated societies, from like isolated islands in Scotland to places, I think isolated places in the Alps as well as to the Andes and in Africa. And he would see all these people that had no tooth decay. They didn't need to have their wisdom teeth taken out because they had big, wide jaws and structures. They were very tall, and they had astounding health. And there were certain things that he noticed that they would feed their children and things that they would do to breed, perhaps in a way, eugenics, right, where their offspring would be strong. The people who lived in the Andes Mountains would go all the way down toward the rivers toward the ocean in order to get salmon eggs, and they would do that because the high omega 3 content, which is good for prenatal brain development and neonatal brain development and whatever else. So nutrition is certainly a very, very huge aspect of this. Interestingly enough, as well, as the more society advances, like the more agrarian we become, and the more we are being moralized into not eating animals. And I don't know about you, but I totally believe in the idea of grain brain. Like we eat way more grains than we ever did in previous history, and minimize things like proteins and fats, which are far more suited for a healthy functioning brain and society. So I don't know. Like I said, that's just some ideas about that.
Well, funny you mentioned that, Bill. I'm not sure if you've ever looked into this, but have you ever looked into what happens to the body when it's exposed to certain types of light?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I know a little bit about light therapy. I'm not any sort of well-read or expert on the subject, but yeah, I mean, I've read some stuff about it or seen people recommend it. Yeah,
yeah, because what they did find in under experiments, which is something quite interesting, is that depending on the light your eyes take in, your body reacts to certain types of light. So this is going to sound crazy, but this apparently has been proven. If you have an injury, let's say you have a cut on your arm, if you expose it to blue light, it actually heals itself. Your body heals the wound twice as quickly compared to, let's say, natural light or a yellow type of light, which sounds utterly ridiculous. But I think it would make sense in an evolutionary sense because of the nighttime, because that's normally a time to rest and heal. I think that maybe something to do with the old part of our brain, which is associated to that. But then they've also found blue light is associated with creativity. So, for example, they've noticed this even with video games, whereas if you look up a game of where it's straight head-to-head combat, or like team-based combat, a team that's based in red versus a team in blue, the red team has a natural psychological advantage purely because of the color. Whereas if you play games where there's a lot more team-based and you've got to think of strategy, any team that's in blue has a higher chance of winning because of that, because it brings about creativity. So I do think I would like to see as an idea, all our street lights, for instance, instead of like that amber type color, why not have, for instance, blue lights? Stuff like that too, because also it has been known our eyes tend to get, because I do remember seeing a trend of more people wearing glasses today than, let's say, 20 years ago, because we're spending so much time in front of a computer screen or a TV screen.
Yeah, well, blue light is generally more stimulating. You get more of it when you're out in the sun, but of course, all these screens are on, and they can be overstimulating where your body's circadian rhythm won't switch on properly. There's also LED infrared light therapy stuff. I've seen read about stuff where there's actually treatment light therapy for inside the body, where your body, the cellular structure inside, with surgeries or whatever, if you take a fiber optic cable and shine it in there, it will help with healing and stuff. So again, I'm no expert. I'm just random things I've come across over the years, because I come across a lot of random things. So
yeah, but that's like one aspect regarding, let's say, future developments. Because one thing I was gonna get into, but obviously I forgot to mention this, but like regarding like the West and obviously let's say the second world, as it's called, as the BRIC countries, one thing which something that I don't think many people are aware of in the West is we kind of do need a complete rebuild of our countries because, in a sense, with Japan, part of the reason they're so far ahead of us is ironically enough thanks to the two bombs in question. Because so much of their land was destroyed, they had to basically rebuild from the ground up. So they had naturally newer tech, whereas let's say in the UK, we're still relying too much on stuff from the first industrial revolution. Now you think, like, for instance, right now, the big demand is high-speed fiber optic cabling. But the problem is you can't necessarily put that everywhere because you have to re-dig up the roads and, like, into cities that have already been built up basically over effectively 200 years. Now, if you were to, quote-unquote, effectively rebuild the entire telecommunications of, let's say, my island, I would think if you went absolutely ham on this and had more money than God, as an expression, that's going to take you at least 10 years as a minimum. And that's just to basically future-proof your country, because there's that aspect. And also another aspect, housing. One thing that I do remember watching at least a year or two ago, I'm not sure if you guys ever watched it, talking about how tower block housing brings about a natural negative psychological effect on people who live among them. I'm not sure if you ever guys caught that.
No, actually, there's a lot of evidence of that, even all the way back from ancient Rome, because a lot of people lived in similar style housing and far worse conditions. But I would always say it's because we're out of our natural environment. We're like caged animals, man. Like literally, we put ourselves in our own zoos when we live in these cities. And I mean, even now, I live in the suburbs, and I can't wait to get out. And for me, I made this investment on this home some years ago. Before I lived where I'm at now, I lived in a little kind of suburban neighborhood, but I had a farm behind me, and I was looking at the mountains, and and I could smell cow manure, and it was a little bit different. It was a lot healthier of an environment.
Yeah, I mean, because I did speak about this before with people when I was discussing how I would run the island, ultimately dealing with international politics aside. I would focus, let's say when it comes to house development, I would like to build proper, like, big suburban style housing right out in the countryside, because that's ultimately the type of housing people want. Not many people want tower blocks. Even, some people could tolerate terraced housing, providing there is at least a garden, stuff like that, because it gives people a sense of, this is my plot of land, this is my facility, in a sense. So it's in a sense of, I won't use the term safe space, but they can clearly say, this is a home. This is my little patch of home that I could basically cut myself off from the rest of the world if they need to, in a sense. Whereas, like, a tower block, you don't really have that sense of, I guess you would say, homeliness, or I don't want to use the word confinement, but that sense of, like, you could just switch off.
What you're talking about reminds me of this term. I don't know if I coined it or if I ripped it off from somebody, but I call it urban cope. It's this idea that you'll be on Twitter or something, people in LA or New York or whatever are always talking about how great it is to live in New York City. You're like, I could just walk everywhere, and there's the bagel shop right below me, and I live, I only have to pay $150,000 a month to live here or whatever it is. But ultimately, these guys are really depressed and really alienating. Like, and some of the more honest ones will tell you that living in a big city, it's a weird dynamic because there's so many people, but you feel so alienated.
Well, I think too with that, Tank. Sorry to cut you off there, but just real quick, like with that too, like all the extreme lefties and their racial justice stuff, that's just this big deal to them. I'll tell you what, man. I see anytime I go into the city, I see far more racial issues, racism, whatever you want to call it, racialism in the city than I ever do in the countryside. Like, it doesn't matter out here, but because you have these clash of cultures and whatever else, I feel like it happens more, and then people have to then, go and virtue signal about it later on. But anyways, that just as an aside note to that, but go ahead.
No, you're right. And this, not to veer too off topic, but this is why I really detest our society that's based on experts in science and reading the studies and stuff, because really most of your problems would be somewhat alleviated if you just looked at how people in the past functioned, and you didn't think of everything that happened, before 1900 as like backwards and stupid. Like, people were onto things, like you were talking about carbs. Like, we're eating so many carbs now, and everybody's got a story of their grandfather who ate nothing but bacon and eggs his entire life and lived to be 150 years old. But that's the thing. But so many people today, it's like I need a study to tell me something, when you can just kind of know things intuitively. We were back in March, I talked about this, but before the pandemic hit, me and some buddies went to Nicaragua for my bachelor party. And so I packed a bag that was like 18 liters, and that's the only thing I took. It was like 2 pair of shorts and some hygiene stuff, and that's what I had for the entire 10 days we were down there. And we spent so we'd wake up, I'd put my little backpack on, and we'd be outside pretty much all day. Outside a lot more than I am like now. And this one point, we were all sitting outside, and we kind of looked at each other, and we're like, I feel great. And we kind of came to this conclusion that we were feeling so much better and had so much more energy because we were getting so much more sunlight.
Yep.
Which is something, and you'll see people say like, oh, studies show this and studies show that. Well, fuck a study. Like, that your grandfather was out in the field more than you are. Right. And it's so you don't need a study. You don't need a study to tell you that water runs downhill. You just need to like think about it for longer than 5 seconds and be like, maybe this modern society, this thing we call progress, isn't as healthy as we think it is. Yeah.
Well, because actually, sorry to interrupt, Bill. I know you want to say something.
No, I mean, you've been trying to talk for a couple of minutes, man. You're good.
No. One thing you mentioned about not being outside was the issue is lack of vitamin D. And that's a big problem in the United States. Like, I think it might have been on the Joe Rogan podcast a few months back. He spoke about something like over 2/3 of people in the United States have below recommended levels of vitamin D in their bodies. Mm. That's a freaking outrageous thing to have. Like I'm surprised why people in the health industry are not like, that's fucking outrageous. We need to sort this out and basically tell people to get the F outside. Get outside, enjoy the sunlight. Go to your park and just happily lay there. Stuff like that. But the problem is that, I'm partially guilty of this myself. There are times where I just want to be locked in my bed, locked in my room.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm absolutely guilty for sure.
Yeah. All I was going to say is the thing is too, is when you're out there, you're in nature. Cause look, man, like I can remember, some of the best times of my life were when I was in the military. And because I was an infantry Marine, we were out in the woods a lot. And a lot of guys complain they don't like going to the field or whatever, but I always enjoyed it. I like training and I like being out there. And you don't think of these burdens. When I was in Iraq and I didn't get a shower for 60 days because I was out there in the beginning of the war and we didn't have anything set up. Like I didn't have these big burdens or depression about life or anything like that. And even though I was completely covered in filth and stunk and whatever else, you just kind of deal with it and your mind gets away from it. And it's interesting because when you are a young man who's 18 years old and you go into boot camp, Marine boot camp is 3 months, and it's 3 months of isolation. You don't see anybody. You don't have phone calls. You get to write letters. That's about it. You get cut off from the world. When you get out of Marine boot camp, all of a sudden you find that the world has moved, that there's all these, new pop stars out or whatever it is. And of course, for me, this was 20 years ago, but still, like you don't really have time to overthink things or suffer, depression about the burdens of the world, because you're just trying to get through day to day. Minute by minute, we have a saying, you get through basically chow by chow, because they feed you 3 times a day, day by day, week by week, or something like that. I don't even remember how it goes, but it's just something like you look forward to each next evolution, next session that's the next thing, because it's a difficult time. You're in with for me, a very large class, about 80 guys, that you don't know. You have these guys that are purposely trained to treat you like you're the lowest of the low, and they're just going to be jerks to you all the time and screw with you and whatever else. It's a lot of mental challenges as far as keeping motivated, as well as there's a physical aspect to it. Plus, you have to learn all this culture and history about the branch of service that you're in, and then that's just the start of training. Because then after that, for me, I had to go to infantry school, and then later on, security force school, which they all presented their own challenge, and then get to my first unit. And then when I went on to my second unit, again, you enter kind of a new culture. So I'm just saying, like, it's a different kind of life for me. In a lot of ways, I left mainly for personal reasons because I wasn't having much of a personal life, but in retrospect, wish I had stayed in, and just would have suffered through and eventually figured it out, the personal life side of things. But yeah, when you have to like farm on a daily basis or chop wood or do whatever, or you make your life about being in nature and having like physical real task, it doesn't mean there isn't time for intellectual work. But what I'm saying is when your life is based on in the moment and you have these needs, you don't have time to get upset or depressed or mopey. And then on top of it, like you were saying, Tank, the sunlight, just being in nature, all that it is great. Think about when you go on vacation, man.
Yeah.
Like how good do you feel? Most people go on vacation somewhere nice and sunny. They don't have a care in the world about things. When does vacation get tedious? When you have to be here and there and here and there and here and there. And it's that ebb and flow of the hustle of life that is modern life. It isn't more of the like, oh, I can just kind of relax. I can enjoy things,
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, right? It's actually reminds me of it reminds me of a video V did of my favorite Romanian. He did a video where he talked about people working at home, where you're obviously thanks to the coup, people are now sick to death of it, and productivity has gone down. And he's just laughing at him like, I bloody well told you so. You got to think of it like vacation, right? Vacation's great when you're away for a week, 2, 3 weeks, maybe a month at a push, depending on what you're doing. When you're on vacation for like 5 years, then you start to hate it. You end up actively hating it because it ceases to be a break to basically becoming the life. Now, obviously, with my work, thanks to the coup, I had lots of time away from work. Obviously, I couldn't go anywhere, but by the time I'm concerned, being away from work is enough of a holiday as it is. Don't have to get up don't have to deal with a rotating sleep pattern, going in doing the exact same thing every 60 seconds. I could just chill out and be like, right, I could just relax away from the buzz. But guess what? Like some people, there are some maniacs out there who don't have vacations. They'll work from dawn to dusk every day of the week till they're freaking 80 years old because they're psychos. As Jordan Peterson said, what kind of man would be crazy enough to do that? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised right now. We could, ironically enough, as we progress, we realize in order for us to go forwards, we may have to go backwards. Yeah. Whereas, going back to Tank's point, where you speak about not everything about the past, they were all backwards, dark age stuff. Like, yeah, to understand the present, you have to understand the past. But the problem is, not many people understand the present and trying to guess what the future is going to be hold. It's like, no, a lot of things in the past are going to happen in the present because we haven't learnt from it. Certain cycles happen. It's whether you can break the cycle is the question.
Well, that's kind of the issue I have with a lot of politics, these days, is that the assumption that we've made is that progress is inherently good, and that we can free ourselves from, it doesn't matter if we never go outside because science is going to come up with some cool pill you can take that's going to solve all your, you can be on SSRIs your whole life and you'll be fine. You don't have to worry about ever seeing the sun or anything. Just listen to all the experts who's going to come up with these cool concoctions of alchemy to give you so that you don't have to. And that's why the dissident environmentalism is so interesting to me, is because these guys have better solutions. And it's oftentimes they're cheaper and anyone can do it. Like anyone is telling you, hey, well, like there was an article that came out relatively recently, and it was talking about the coof, and they're saying, whatever you care about the coof, whatever you believe about it, it's been shown that people that are healthier do better when they get it. Okay, so he says we've been shut down for 9 months, and the only thing that they've told you to do is wear a mask. No one said go outside and get more exercise. As a matter of fact, they've made it harder to exercise in a lot of cases. No one said, maybe give up eating carbs for the next 9 months. No one said, go to jiu-jitsu. Yeah. No, nothing. There is no preventative maintenance in Western medicine, really. And that's, I think that kind of stems from this idea that I've been talking about of we're just so obsessed with like what an expert says. And really, experts are a new thing in terms of human society. Like before, there really were no experts. Like I might be a guy that's a blacksmith.
There was always a priest class, though.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about in the end, right?
Yeah. They call it the clergy class.
Right.
Let's say the medieval time period, it was divided by 4 classes. You had your peasants, you had your warriors, you had your clerics, and then you had the establishment or the monarchy, as they call it.
Well, you have shamans before that. There's always that like medicine man, ancient wisdom thing. But Tank, you're right. Excuse me. You're right in that we didn't have like the scientific experts. I don't know. I'm just skeptical of authority in general is my thing. Like make your argument, present your evidence. That's always my thing.
I mean, to me, like, I'm not going to say I'm a quote unquote status here, but I do find when it comes to the engineering world, there's a case where you can quote unquote trust the experts because in that sense, if they screw up, their heads are on the line. Whereas if you look at other aspects where they're so-called experts, because they have no sense of accountability, therefore whatever they can say, they could just get away with it. Or they'll come up with an excuse. Whereas, like, for instance, in my field, you're only as good as what you produce. So guess what? If you start to slip or you start making bad products, guess what? You're effectively trash and will be thrown out the door. So there is this natural sort of hyper-competitive natural selection aspect in terms of what you can do. And I think it's very pro-innovation, but there's also there is a major spitefulness and political sense within it, always questioning stuff. So when it comes to like regulations, they're constantly questioning of, wait, it doesn't say this. Oh, but it says this. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It says this. It doesn't say I can't do this, and so on and so forth. So you have this constant head bashing of people when it comes to ideas. And then you end up, and everyone else basically benefits from it. Because I love when people talk about trickle-down economics. And I'm just like, the only trickle-down that we know that we have that actually works is with technology. Everything from the automotive sector to the computer science sector to aerospace to medical facilities. It's consistent. Like, for instance, fiber optic cabling, that was used in military throughout Vietnam. It didn't become used for commercial stuff till really the 2000s. For instance, fuel injection, for instance. That wasn't a common thing on automotives until really the 80s, but it was invented back in the 30s during the Nazi Germany.
Right.
So stuff like that will naturally improve, and there is natural progress, whether it be more economical, stronger, lighter, etc., safer and stuff like that. The problem is when it comes to the human aspect, where they're trying to bring progress, ironically enough, they're taking away more and more of, let's say, what it means to live or what it means to be human. And this ironically brings on another question, which some people have predicted coming 30, 40 years down the line. I mean, a lot of people do reckon this because of US military industrial complex. What happens to the point where they start augmenting soldiers for war, where they give them like implants or basically replace their limbs with bionic super limbs so they can run faster, hit harder, and so on and so forth? What happens then?
When we get Halo.
Are you going to push for like a Haze society?
Yeah.
Are you going to have like a giant civil war between the pure humans versus the cyber humans? Because You know, because some would say, let's say, those who are against the implementation, we're saying we're the pure humans. We are truly who we are. And you can say the side means you're like, we're the next stage of evolution. We are the so-called master race. You're going to get cleansed out. You know, because those kind of questions are going to come.
You know, you guys just kind of hit on something that I think is pretty interesting. You're talking about we're talking about what is an expert or what is, you know, in our society. It seems that we could use the definition of an expert, or we could define it as an expert is someone who has a lot of authority, but actually isn't responsible for any of the drawbacks their decisions bring about. So, like, you got like the experts that might come up with a vaccine that gives people, you know, Bell's palsy or makes them whatever infertile. You know, at the end of the day, they're gonna be like, oh, well, there might be some lawsuits, but at the end of the day, they're gonna be like, well, you know, they tried. You know, you still got to listen to the experts. Whereas someone that's like a plane engineer, like we were talking about earlier, you know, if that plane falls out of the sky, then it's somebody's ass for sure.
Well, you're certainly right, Tank. A lot of this is about accountability. As far as the Bell palsy thing, it is something to keep in mind that they're like, well, it does go back to normal after a few days. It's like, okay, I get that, but not a good look for those few days. Scary, you know, kind of scary that this thing did that to me. And you guys were saying, oh, it doesn't even cure anything. It just helps you get through it. And it's like, well, I'm going to get through this 99.98, you know, 87% anyways. So why do I care? In fact, part of me wants it just to have it done and over with if I already haven't had it, you know?
Well, I mean, funny enough, speaking of the Jar Jars, as that's what we called it yesterday, like for me, like one thing that has brought me huge amounts of suspicions is the fact that with the one made in Germany thanks to a Turkish immigrant, from what I understand, you cannot legally sue the company in question. And I'm just like, whoa. What do you mean I cannot sue them? Now, to me, that raises a major red flag because you're basically saying, look, you could be heavily infected by this if you take it, and you can't sue us for it. And I'm just like, no effing way. I would say, no, you got to be able to accept accountability. You got to allow the people to sue, or we're not taking it. Simple as that.
But this is the protectionism that we've always seen historically with what we would call the elites, what we would call the people that are trying to persuade our societies to go in a certain way. And I keep warning people and say it over and over again. They do not have your best interest in mind. They have their interest in mind. Exactly. And just because some of them may seem to believe they have good intentions does not mean that their intentions will work out all that well. But
I know. I mean, sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me of the speeches regarding the European question. When I hear a certain Palpatine lookalike talk about, oh, it's best to protect our interests if we stay in Europe. And I'm just like, do you even know what our best interests are? Ironically enough, a lot of our best interests effectively means screwing you over. You do understand that, right? Like, you do understand it. Like, if I was looking at purely objectively, what's in my island's best interest, bleeding you out of every single penny you got is very much in my own interest. Because therefore, I can control you.
Yeah, Fart with in the D-Live chat just said that protectionism indicates a farce. And I would agree, man. Like, why, if you believe in what you're espousing to be true, why are you afraid of clapback? It's like this thing of questioning the election. Why would we not want to certify that everything was legit? If you are the winner, say Iran, say I'm Joe Biden, why would I not be like, yes, please look at all of the ballots and make sure they're all, signature verified and everything else. I want Americans to know that they voted for me and there was no cheating here and that I am a legit person for it.
Yeah.
Why? Why wouldn't you do that? Right now in Maricopa County in Arizona, they're fighting the legislature who's saying, no, we're going to do an audit. And they're like, no, we're not going to let you do an audit. Come on.
Like, no, I mean, this is my point. This is the aspect of accountability. This is why, like, for me, you're going to laugh at how utterly crazy this will sound, right? But let's say if I was in charge of the United Kingdom, I would sign a literal legal documentation, like a constitutional legal documentation, with my own blood, saying if I don't do what I need to do in this time, I could be legally terminated. if someone were to do that, people will think, Jesus Christ, this guy is crazy. I like it. Like, because ironic enough, this is what I mean about this. I guess just to say, I like to call it the trust. I think I don't know if there's a term for it, but I call it the trustworthiness of the absolute crazy. As in, if someone you know full well is absolutely crazy and they say something and they're going to do something absolutely crazy, you're naturally going to trust them because of the fact they're absolutely crazy. So it's like it's almost like an assertiveness sense. So, and like how can I put this? So you have that, but the problem is with the engineering world, we could say, like, somebody could say, right, we're going to build a car that goes around to 24 hours a month. It's going to be this heavy. It's going to produce this much downforce. This is how much power it's going to be done. And you know, I could turn around and say, okay, go ahead, do it. And they build it up, but like, I'll clap their hands and say, yeah, they bloody well done it. Anyone who disrespects them, you kind of get on your knees and apologize. Those kind of things. It's just ultimately, like, it's very easy to say whatever you want when you have no accountability. But when you have absolute accountability, you become very conservative with what you say and what you think.
Right, exactly. Well, because, you know, Jordan Peterson kind of talked about that, about believing in what you say and taking responsibility for yourself and not just parroting stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, for instance, when I did my studies, for instance, when I did one of my when we had to do my engine exams, everyone else had little Ford 4-cylinders like you find in the Fiesta. Me, I had a 3-liter straight six straight out of a GS300 Lexus, which, for those who don't know, that's basically the same engine in the Toyota Supra, just non-turboed. I had to completely rebuild that, basically strip it down to all there was to block, clean it all up, put it back together again, and I did it in 3 hours. Where Tutor expected because most people couldn't do the 4 cylinders in 6 hours. I mean, and I remember going to my tutor saying, "Yeah, I'm finished." And he looked at his watch. He's like, "It's just 12 o'clock. You're finished." I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead, fire it up." And literally, the test was you had to rebuild it. No parts were missing, but I had to fire up first time. Tutor comes back, turns on the car, started first time purring like a kitten, as the expression goes.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, "Oh yeah, you." And now he's basically right. I could trust you to rebuild an engine because it's about demonstration. Whereas a lot of studies, and one of my aspects of the education system, is that a lot of places are not based on practicalness; it's based on theoretical. And as far as I'm concerned, theoretical is worthless unless you have the practical.
Yeah. Well, Kizza, we're probably gonna have to keep it there because Tank and I both said that we're gonna keep this to 2 hours this week. Yeah. You're right about next week. I because I didn't realize the dates would be the 26th, so we're probably not going to do this then. Are you down for the 2nd though of January?
Yeah, sure. The 2nd should be fine.
I mean, we'll talk afterwards or whatever. We'll keep in touch as we always do. Of course, you're always invited to come on our Wednesday night streams if you would like. We just we got to deal with that time difference thing. I don't know if you want to do a stream at 7 p.m. in the evening, whatever that is over there.
Yeah, I mean,
that'd be like midnight over there, right?
Oh yeah, that would be like midnight. That's not.
Yeah, far too late, I assume. So, yeah, but with that, Tank, hey, do you want to bring up real quick? I put the private chat, our YouTube channel, and the D Live, so people can at least visualize that, whatever platform they're looking on. And then I have my channel, All-1, which I haven't really been plugging, but been thrown into the chat. Hey guys, we appreciate you watching. We're kind of hit or miss because we're not well known yet with live viewers, but we do try to engage with the chat when we can. I don't know. You got anything else to say, Tank?
No, that's good. I guess we'll just pick it up next time.
Yeah, I mean, we're just gonna have to because we're the type of folk that if I don't cut it off, all three of us will keep talking for another 3 hours. So,
yeah, but I think people like honesty.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But can you do that, Tank? Get those links up on the screen share real quick?
Yeah. It looks like it was. Oh.
Sorry, folks. We have a new look. Same great taste, though. We went from using Discord to Streamlabs. So Tank, being the producer here, is still working out all the kinks. I mean, I can share them, dude, and you can.
I'll put them in. That's fine. Yeah, we'll get them all good. So anyone that's watching, they can get on these here links for your channel. I don't have a channel. I have an OnlyFans. It's $4.99 a month, and it's just pictures of a butthole, but they're there.
If the likes of Bell.Pink can earn something like a silly amount of money, how anyone can.
Kizza, you got, of course, your
yes, I am
co-hosting with Yiz. So
yeah. Let me just find her channel so I could post this up. Yeah, but at the moment, right now, she's pushing for 2.5k likes.
Okay.
So yeah, she's currently on 2.33k likes. So hopefully we can push that up and obviously get us on here on all the ends justify the means up to just a nice 100k subs, just 100 subs, sorry. Just nice, and then we could go to 250, then 500, then 1,000. Steady progress.
Yeah, and over on All Minus One, my personal channel. I mean, this is my baby too, but I keep things separate. But over on All Minus One on YouTube, that is getting close to 100 subs. So if you guys like anything that I've said on the show, go over there and give me a sub. Watch the stuff. I go through deep dives. I do have shorter segments, but I go through like deep, longer dives. I expect you to be an educated person and to look deeper into the information than what I present.
I would highly recommend the Fourth Industrial Revolution video.
Yeah, and I've done several videos on that actually. But yeah, the one you talked about, that was like the first one I did. So yeah. But I always appreciate that, Kiz, that you liked it.
I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head for the most part. But ultimately, I know you have some limitations in certain aspects. But ultimately, we all have our limitations.
Yeah, I definitely have time constraints and personal life stuff and dyslexia and insomnia and all that stuff. But hey,
insomnia. I was going to mention this earlier. One thing I have heard on a podcast I was listening, what helps with insomnia, believe it or not, do you know one of the things this guy recommended? You're going to laugh at this.
Shoot, go for it.
Before you go to sleep, have a really hot shower or a hot bath.
And
literally dry yourself off and then go straight to sleep.
Yeah, I to some degree I've tried a lot of stuff over the years, man. My daughter both gets insomnia as well, so does my father. So I'm pretty sure there's a genetic component to it. But honestly, it could be dietary, it could be whatever else. Basically, I don't sleep well unless I'm just I'm constantly working and physical, and my brain doesn't like to shut off.
I mean, there are a few things that quote unquote do generally put a man to sleep, but I'm not sure I can say it on YouTube. It's because of Mrs. Majewski's terms and conditions, but a good roll round the bed normally helps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sometimes I don't know. I'm not weird that way though. I don't want to pass out after that, honestly.
I do know it has been the case for some. I can't really speak because it's been a while.
Well, I mean, I know that is a big complaint of a lot of women, but I've rarely had that experience, and I used to be a bit of a man whore. So, anyways, guys, with all that said, we are going to jump off here because, like I said, we're just over 2 hours, and we will be back Wednesday night at 7 p.m. on D Live as well as YouTube. We will probably be working on other platforms. We're trying to figure out what else we can stream on because we know that YouTube is a dead end eventually with their big tech overlord censorship. And with that, we will also be back doing a Saturday stream at 3 p.m. with KizzaGT. He is a friend of ours, and that'll, I guess, will be on January the 2nd.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll think of a subject.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we don't really generally need to. So I don't know. Anyone else have anything else to say before we cut out here?
Oh yeah, just please go like and subscribe. And I am also hopefully the next time I'm on, I'll be writing up a so-called rough draft of the so-called County Uri plan.
Yes,
Which
and are
I
you
have-
supposed to be on the British Night soon?
Oh, we did that on Wednesday. We had a big like Christmas stream,
Okay.
and there was like 12 of us, and that was pretty fun and chaotic. But yeah, it was pretty good fun. And yes, and also I've also been slightly spreading my little propaganda through super chats to bigger channels, and let's just say they've cotton on to the plan. They're liking the idea of the plan. So maybe I need to get some merchandise, make some T-shirts out of it.
Write it down and get a website, Kizza. That's what you need to do, brother.
Well, I don't know how to make a website, but I'll try and make a rough draft of a Word document.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's it for us. This has been the Ends Justify the Memes. If I can talk. Everything on here is a meme. This has been the Ends Justify the Memes. And remember, the ends always justify those memes. Tank, play that outro, buddy.
I'm talking about all the way to the top, yeah. Unjustifiably in a position that I'd rather not be in. But the cream will rise to the top, oh yeah. Macho Madness, yeah, it's got more to offer. And President Jack Tunney thinks that I got, yeah. And I'm gonna tell you something right now. Cards stacked against the Macho Man Randy Savage in WrestleMania 3. Yeah, let me say it, yeah. Let me say it out loud. And let me point to the president of the World Wrestling Federation. The Macho Man Randy Savage is not happy with your decision, yeah. I am the cream in the World Wrestling Federation.